Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back, Tracy. It's good to see you again. I'm excited that we get to share a little bit more information about vocabulary today. So today, our topic in our third video is about the vocabulary integration into a variety of subject areas. So you and I both know, we've had a lot of conversations about this, that no matter what subject area we teach or what grade level we teach, vocabulary is definitely at the heart of the understanding and application of any subject area. So let's dig into this topic a little bit today. To set the stage for our conversations today with vocabulary across subject areas, we know that we will be targeting skill sets for students in word recognition, so really understanding the pronunciation, the decoding and encoding of words as part of this work and support for students and for our instruction. And of course, the language comprehension piece, we hope to build background knowledge with this explicit instruction across all of our subjects, and of course, build vocabulary knowledge. And then ultimately, we hope that as students are reading, when they see these terms come up across the subject areas, that they really will build and expand their knowledge about the words that they're seeing in print. So let's head into our content for today. And Tracy, you can maybe start by kind of giving us that kind of critical question that we could focus on this morning.
Absolutely. We always start with what drives your vocabulary selection and instruction. And in this video, we are going to specifically look at integrating and selecting vocabulary across the tiers of vocabulary. So we have already talked about selection. This video is going to really go into integration across subject areas. So with that, let's move on. Okay, so our role-specific questions. If you are an administrator, you may want to ask yourself, are your vocabulary routines from teachers evident and followed by all educators? So like the routine of teaching through explicit instruction, is it evident across all your educators? Also, what are your steps to creating these routines? Do the routines include explicit instruction of new grade level words? Remember, we're initially looking at standards in order to choose our words. And now it's within the routine, is explicit instruction really in there? As a coach, coaches are so important. So as a coach, how can you deal with vocabulary routines that are aligned with evidence-based practices? Are your teachers using evidence-based practices? And if not, how can you coach them to do so? And for teachers that this isn't necessarily their way of doing business, that's fine. But how as a coach can you break down what you need to support them into manageable chunks to model? So in other words, not just coaching the introduction or repeating the words, but that they're actually using the I do, we do, you do approach to vocabulary and explicit instruction so that students get lots and lots of exposures. Specialists, you may ask yourself, how can we prime vocabulary knowledge prior to use in content learning? This gets to background knowledge, and if students do not have the background knowledge to be successful right off the get-go with the lesson, how can you prime that knowledge so that they're prepared to access the curriculum? Also, who will create adapted materials for vocabulary lessons as needed? How will you make sure that all the unique features are available from what you create or assistive technology or any of those things for individual learners during instruction, not just for practice, but that these access features are available to them throughout instruction and assessment. Content specialists are general educators. How can we prime vocabulary knowledge in using content learning? So in case you are not necessarily collaborating or working with an intervention specialist or other types of specialists, do you build priming in for your group of students to make sure you're all starting out on an even learning field? And also, what will be included in the vocabulary routine that you use every time a new set of vocabulary are explicitly taught? So it's very important, this whole routine we've been saying throughout today, that it needs to be predictable for students so that they know what you're doing. And explicit instruction really develops that routine for you. It walks you through it. Also, what activities can you plan for offering time for educators and students to use new words? Because ultimately, if they don't use them, they lose them. So we know we have to apply those words in situations that they would understand. So those are things that we can all keep in mind as we go through this next video.
All right. Thanks, Tracy, for setting the stage so nicely with all those guiding questions and really reflecting all the roles that are present throughout our school day. Everybody kind of needs to be on board and working together to make this happen. So speaking of kind of getting everybody on board and organizing how this comes into play in a classroom, let's take a look at a daily schedule. And there will be nuances of difference depending on if you teach in primary grades where all subjects are integrated throughout the daily schedule, that the teacher is teaching all of the subject areas themselves, or if this is more of a departmentalized approach where teachers are teaching very specific subject areas and they have repeat instruction with different groups of learners that may change a little bit. We happen to have an example here where we're showing all of the subject areas represented throughout the school day. So as we take a look, any teacher can do this. As we take a look at the daily instruction throughout the school day and all the classes or courses or subject areas that you teach, we really want a way to go back into those plans and analyze where we are explicitly teaching vocabulary. And we need to be able to articulate, are we focusing on word recognition skill sets? And if we recall correctly, those are skills in the word's pronunciation. So how do we really segment the sounds or utilize those words in context and sentences and in language or communication, oral language or communication. And we also know word recognition contains that sound symbol correspondence. So for students who are learning how to decode words still, or they're working to encode words for writing purposes or decode them for reading, are we explicitly teaching what that looks like? What are the sounds that go together, that are blended together, that make that word happen in print? So when are we explicitly teaching those pieces and parts of new vocabulary? And when are we also teaching the meaning through context and ultimately to achieve comprehension? Meaning instruction is of critical importance here as well. And we know that meaning is supported by things like conversations, by using of that term in context or reading about it. Sometimes images or icons are also represented with vocabulary to remember the meaning specifically, not to read the word, but to remember the meaning of the specific word. So there are a lot of layers of our daily plan that could include opportunities to integrate vocabulary instruction on both the word recognition side and the language comprehension side, where we're applying vocabulary specific skills. if we analyze a plan, and there actually are kind of step-by-step guides that you can use. This example comes with a step-by-step guide where you can go in and analyze the amount of time you're specifically spending on both word recognition and language comprehension skill sets throughout the school day. But all of these exposures together as a collective come together to hopefully give students enough repetitive practices in these new words and the use of these new words and learning the new words, that they can build their background knowledge, and hopefully that information sticks and that they can use those words when they recall them, when they need them, they can use them again at other times. So this is actually a checkpoint where you could potentially pause the video and take a look at your own plans to see where you are integrating vocabulary currently and how much time are you spending on that. Is it a blip on the radar? Are we really digging in and spending some real time to explicitly teach these routines, as Tracy has talked about? So once we know exactly how we're teaching, the words we're teaching, we need to communicate very clearly to our students what the expectation is for them. Is the expectation that based on this instruction that they can tell you the meaning of the word? Is that the only expectation though? Is there an expectation sometimes that they use the word while they're communicating, either through writing or through language? Are they expected to use the new terms again and again somehow in that context? Are they expected to be able to decode the word and read the word phoneme by phoneme to make sure that they really can see that word in print, and hopefully over time build automaticity where that word is not foreign to them anymore, but becomes part of their lexicon. They can just recall it very quickly. And also, we need to make sure that if there's a requirement that a student spell words correctly, certain words from the vocabulary list, we need to help students understand that up front. If there is an expectation that accurate spelling of one or more of the words on our list to be spelled accurately by the student as they are using them anytime over the course of the instruction, they just need to know that up front, because sometimes if we aren't clear with students, they may not put forth the effort that it really takes to learn how to spell some of these words. And so we need to just tell those things up front. This is actually a template that you could potentially download and use in your classes across subject areas again. So sometimes we use additional layers of support to help students understand that vocabulary are not single entities. Most often when we select vocabulary, like we showed in our very first video clip where we were talking about the selection of tier 1, 2, and 3 vocabulary words, most often these vocabulary words are going to be coming to students in groups or clusters of vocabulary words because they have connectedness to one another. So in this case, there are several different supports here that we've used to help students understand that some vocabulary words are related to one another in one way or another. And we've used graphics here to help show the relationships, some color coding to show the relationships. So on the right-hand side, there's a picture that shows a variety of vocabulary words on rings, like metal rings with index cards. And the vocabulary words are represented by the text or the word itself. Also an image to help with the meaning, understand the meaning of that specific word. And you'll notice that those words on those rings are color coded. So collectively in this unit of study, all of these words were part of the unit as a whole. And so the unit was on ecosystems or habitats. But within that group of words, so this is a really large group of words, we had to also help students understand that there were subgroups also. There were connected vocabulary among that large group. Some of these words were connected even more closely by a specific ecosystem. So if there was an ecosystem related to the rainforest or the cave or a pond, or let's say an ocean, those then were also subgroups of vocabulary that have relationships to one another. We would find them possibly used in text together, when we were writing, we possibly would use those words together in that way as well. So this group of, this collection of vocabulary words, you can see were color coded because not only were they part of a unit as a whole, they also had subgroups as well. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that sometimes we're going to reference vocabulary words related to text. So there are different baskets of text represented here. Some of the texts have topical connection, and you would see vocabulary words related to the United States, the states in our nation. And it's a possibility in one of the other baskets, there are books related to poetry. So there are some specific words that are related to certain genres of text even that students would have to get to know. So there are groupings of vocabulary that we can help students understand by kind of giving some of these visual features in our classrooms as well. So Tracy, do you want to share a little bit about vocabulary meaning and really focusing on the meaning of these new terms?
Sure. Things to keep in mind with that is when children learn pronunciation and meanings of words, it's usually indirect. They learn that indirectly through their experiences in life. They learn it through oral and written language. However, when you're learning specific vocabulary words that are, let's say, tier 2 and tier 3 specifically, that are very subject specific, those will be taught through explicit instruction. You want to make sure that everyone has that meaning, but also think about pronunciation is the first step in explicit instruction. That's very critical, and we can't always take it for granted or assume that every student is coming in with a pronunciation understanding. They may have a different dialect. There are lots of situations that may affect how they're pronouncing words, but that's very important for spelling, encoding and decoding. So something that also is very, very important is to remember that quality vocabulary instruction leads to gains in reading comprehension. So if vocabulary is not a focus, you may not see the gains in reading comprehension with students, because remember, it's part of the language comprehension piece of the simple view of reading. And you need both parts of those, the simple view of reading, in order to have that product of reading comprehension. So vocabulary really needs to be a focus. So we talked in video number 2 about explicit instruction of vocabulary, and Anita Archer's book, Explicit Instruction in specific. And I highly encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to watch any of Anita Archer's vocabulary explicit instruction videos. She goes through from step 1 to step 4, everything you need to know. So on the left-hand side are the 4 steps of explicit instruction. Go back to session 2 if you would like to know more about that. But we really want to look at also and consider that dual coding. The visual, if you're using visuals like Shauna just showed you on the rings and the cards and different things like that, to help support learning meaning, the words must match. They need to be there. We're not supplanting the words or the expectation that students will learn to encode and decode with the use of visuals. So they really need to match and be a support, not supplant that. Also, the use of sentence starters, Anita Archer really promotes this in the fourth step in checking students' understanding. So for instance, if a tier 2 word might be composition that you are explicitly teaching, you may use a sentence starter like, the composition of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is, Shauna?
Oh, peanut butter, jelly, and bread.
Right.
And if
The
I repeat the
composition
sentence, yeah, go ahead.
is the composition of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is peanut butter, jelly, and bread. Right. That was a great, example or whatever. And then you can move from that general piece to earth science or whatever is specific within the standard. So another important thing is examples and non-examples when you're checking for understanding. It's that students can give their own examples. They can give sentence stating this would be an example or this is not an example. Like an example of composition is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It is not an example of composition of just peanut butter. I don't know. It's just something. Also, she encourages the use of word families. So with the word composition, do they know that the word compose, composer, all of those that can be made out of composition is all related with that root of compose. And I believe Shauna has an example coming up next, and we'll look at something new with that.
Yeah, I love all of the examples that Anita shares. She has so many great strategies to really apply explicit instruction and kind of give context to it from a student perspective. Like, what does this look like as a student is participating in some of these activities? And so you had shared the example, of course, of the sentence starter, which I love. And then also the word families, the vocabulary families. And you gave the example of compose or composition. And there in the Frayer model that we showed earlier, we just wanted to bring this back around because there are nuances of those explicit instruction strategies here as well. So when you were talking about the word families, this model or example does kind of call out those morphemes and give additional layers of words that use those same morphemes. So with the word astronomy, it actually has 2 different morphemes within it. And so the astro morpheme has other associations or words that are family related to that astronomy word, with astronaut and astrology and astronomer. And then the ending portion of this word, the morpheme there also goes into things like in the NOMI, it's the economy and taxonomy. So there are also word families associated with the endings of that word as well. So we just want to reference this graphic organizer again, because we were talking about word recognition and language comprehension coming together. So this graphic organizer does go into the decoding and pronunciation to the syllable and phoneme level with astronomy. It also has the word family piece we just talked about with the morphemes. And Anita does talk about using very simplistic and kind of simple definitions to help students understand, along with the image that helps visually sometimes represent those terms. We try to also say, just give that really short example of a definition that students could possibly remember. It's not long and drawn out. They don't have to memorize it at all, but it's very much helping them to understand that word in context when they see it or when they're thinking about using it for speech or writing. So again, this is another checkpoint in this clip where you could potentially stop the video, pull this template, and think about words that you are going to be using in your next unit of study or that you pulled from standards. And you could practice plugging this into this template to potentially prepare it for a lesson that you may be going to start in this coming school year with students. So definitely want to maybe pause here and try it out a little bit. All right, Tracy, to wrap up our video 3, let's talk a little bit about those administrative look-fors. What will administrators be looking for, seeing when they see that really all of the vocabulary is crossing those boundaries of subject areas? It's not just taught in English language arts, but really this is universal instruction. What will they see?
Absolutely. Well, some of the things that administrators should look for are specifically the materials. Are the materials scaffolding the vocabulary instruction for students? Is it providing decoding cues? Not a cueing system, but decoding cues for students. Visual images to support meaning, morphemes, all the pieces that we were just talking about that support learning the meaning of vocabulary words. Also, explicit instruction. We're going back to that again, that it's planned for and implemented as a result of that plan. So it's not just something that they do, that a teacher does, but that it is really intentional, and it is planned, and the words are planned, and they're, selected in a meaningful way. Also, cross-subject representation of tier 2 vocabulary instruction in each grade level. So, is in middle school, let's say, is a social studies teacher using the same tier 2 vocabulary at the same time as an ELA teacher, or even a science teacher, because remember, those cross all of those subject areas. And the more exposures a student has, the more chance they have of retention and the ability to apply that vocabulary. Also, identification of vocabulary words from the standards in each subject, that they're part of curriculum mapping. So again, we go back to being proactive and not just having a curriculum map that gives a resource or very cursory information, but what are those tier 2 vocabulary words that are identified that we can align across and integrate into all those subjects? Elements of word recognition, language vocabulary use, and comprehension checks are happening within all subject areas. This is very important, and administrators should know what that looks and sounds like, so that if a teacher is not using that, then they can support them and maybe ask a coach to support them. And lastly, are students engaged in the use of new and specific vocabulary words during class discussions, writing and reading? Shauna and I were talking earlier about, the amount of talk ratio, teacher talk versus student talk. And if you watch Anita Archer's videos around explicit instruction for vocabulary, the students are talking more than she is. They're engaging with the word. They're not passive participants within that. This is active in reading, writing, discussion. All of that is helping them make meaning. So, administrators, you have a lot to look for, and collaborate with your coaches on, if you do see something, that coach can support these pieces with your teachers.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Tracy. And I do think that teachers can support one another as models for one another in their instruction as well. So I think we both would also recommend that teachers go into one another's classroom and observe instruction in one another's classroom to see what vocabulary, this deep kind of explicit vocabulary instruction looks like. Getting tips from colleagues is really a powerful tool in building skills as an educator. So we also recommend that as well. So
Yes.
hopefully this content again was helpful. That across the subject areas, we're going to see more and more vocabulary instruction occurring, and that students' vocabularies are just going to explode, and they're going to have wonderful conversations using a lot of these high-level terms from Tier 2 and Tier 3. Well, we thank you for being here and joining us again for our third video. Stay tuned, video 4 is on its way. We'll talk to you all then.